A fresh report out today reveals the extent of Australia's rental crisis, affordability plunging to record lows according to the survey of nearly 46,000 listings, with fewer than 1% being affordable for low-income earners. Anglicare Australia, which commissioned the report, warns it's a deepening problem for regional communities.
It used to be that you could move to a regional area, to the outskirts of a city. It used to be that capital cities showed the least affordability. We're not seeing affordability anywhere for people on these incomes.
Joining me now for more on this, Patterson Ross, Policy Team Leader at the Tenants Union of New South Wales. That's an interesting comment we've just heard there from Anglicare, because yes, previously you thought, well, things are getting a bit expensive in Sydney, you had a regional option. With COVID in particular, so many people moving there, perhaps even just buying a property there, that's no longer a solution. Has that really hit people hard?
It has, and the regions really were struggling from pretty early on in COVID because of those moves. But the other thing that's changed is the way that people make their housing. So a lot more people were trying to live by themselves rather than sharing, because there were kind of worries about COVID and also work from home, that people were looking for offices, they were looking for places to keep doing what they needed to. So that all had an impact on what kind of housing people were looking for, and we really haven't adjusted the stock to cope with that.
So when we talk about the extent of the crisis right now, there's obviously always two elements. There's rental stock, there's demand. Rental stock is seemingly going to get worse because we've got building companies going bust, we've got lower approvals in a lot of states, we've had supply issues, inflation with buildings. So that's one element. But demand, well, it's set to get bigger. We're getting migration ramp up again post-COVID. So if it's seen as a crisis now, how bad could this be in a year or two?
Look, we really have seen those significant changes in the demand of the type of housing that we already knew had added the need for about 300,000 more properties than we had. And we saw rents rising again, particularly in regional areas when migration was in negative figures. So, this is really an Australian-made problem. It pre-exists COVID, and it certainly is not driven by migration. The number of people looking for homes obviously impacts the type of experience that people are going to have. But ultimately, this is more a problem on the supply side. We haven't been ensuring that the industry continues to build to meet the demand. We always are going to have a growing population, regardless of the mechanism. And we need to make sure that the building industry is able to meet that need. Primarily, when there's not the financial incentive through the pure market, that's the time for government to step in. And as you said, we're seeing building companies going under. That means people are losing their jobs. An ideal solution here is for government to step in and start hiring those building companies to continue building, preserving the jobs, but also meeting the needs of the community.
In terms of how tight the market is, we're getting towards sort of 1% of stock. It depends a lot on the market. I know Canberra's not nearly as tight as New South Wales. Have we had experience with it getting significantly worse than that? I mean, are we talking caravans, tent cities? Is there a previous time when things were this tight and we can see what sort of how it played out?
So it's really tough. I mean, on record, we have no comparable period. So in terms of modern data sources that go back to sort of the early 2000s, maybe even into the 90s, what you'd see is occasionally towns might have a really low vacancy rate, but you don't see it at every state and territory, every capital city, all the regions, all at the same time. And that's really the defining feature now. And so although the broader economy is doing a lot better, really we are talking about conditions of renting that go back to times like the Great Depression. We are already seeing sports grounds, ovals being used for temporary accommodation, including using tents. We're hearing from kids who are travelling into school every day from their tents, and that's their home. So that's a huge, tough ask. And it's going to have massive impact on people's education and then their future So we really need to get a handle on this crisis, and ultimately it is making sure that we have the homes that people need at the prices that they can afford and of good quality. One of the big things in Australia is very low quality rental stock.
Just finally and briefly on price though, I mean, we're seeing people say, look, rents are going up, 10%, it's unaffordable. Inflation's at about 7%, and we've had interest rates spike massively. That figure, I'm not, downplaying it, doesn't sound great, but it's not as if we'd expect it to be going at 2 or 3%. It's going to be high. Everything's high at the moment.
Yeah, although the latest release, inflation generally was falling and rents were hitting their record rise. So rents are in some ways still, the biggest rises in those inflation figures are probably to come, because we know that advertised rents have been hitting 20, 30% in a lot of places, and that's not yet reflected in the CPI. I think that it's absolutely true. There's a lot of cost of living pressures, but for a renting household, the rent is by far their biggest cost. It's way more than energy. It's it's the thing that drives problems in everything else, and so that's why we need to get a much more stable renting sector. We have essentially been seeing this really volatile, uncertain time. We need stability for both renters and landlords, to be honest.
Leo, thank you for your time today.
Absolutely, anytime.